Dear colleagues, our panel is here to discuss social welfare of survivors in the Ukraine after the Russian invasion. But I want to begin the conversation in a somewhat odd manner by referencing the two IHRA definitions, anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial and distortion. Most of you are familiar with the anti-Semitism definition, which I had the privilege of introducing, and together with late Romanian chair of IHRA, Mihnea Constantinescu, steered to adoption in 2016. But that definition never would have been introduced if we didn't adopt, under the Canadian chairmanship of Mario Silver, another definition, which I helped write and steer, that of Holocaust denial and distortion 3 years earlier. The process of adopting the anti-Semitism definition took about 3 years. The denial and distortion definition took 5. The issue that held it up was the refusal of some countries to accept a definition that included Holocaust distortion, which was already being used as a political and national tool. And that brings us to Ukraine, where, as I said, the day after the invasion, at an IHRA conference in Kalamata, Greece, that Vladimir Putin's aggression, his war, is built upon distortions of history. Indeed, distortions of the very history that we have gathered here to safeguard. The acceptance of an accurate historical narrative is the basis for any discussion of restitution. For without agreement of what happened, who are the perpetrators, including both foreign invaders and local collaborators, who were the victims and what was done to them, without any acceptance or acknowledgement of responsibility, there can be no discussion of restitution. This has been part of the discussion around restitution since World War II ended. The Romanian scholar Stefan Cristian Ionescu recently pointed out that, I quote, before going into Paris in 1946 to advocate for Jewish rights, Romanian Jewish leaders sought to gather information on the losses suffered by their communities in order to back their claims for restitution and reparation with solid facts. That is the basis of all our work. But as the Russian aggression against Ukraine demonstrates, Holocaust distortion is also a threat against Western liberal civilization, and that is another reason to affirm the historical record. But history is composed of human stories, and it is those Holocaust survivors who suffered under the Nazis and who are now threatened by Russian aggression in Ukraine who illustrate what can happen when history is distorted for anti-Semitic or nationalist purposes. How we help those survivors on the most basic level is what our panelists will be telling us next. Their actions and the plight of survivors is a vivid reminder to us all to never lose sight of the human suffering caused by extremist ideologies, or what we can do about it if we really try. And with that, I'm going to turn the session over to our panelists, beginning with Greg Schneider, CEO of the Claims Conference. Greg?
Okay, good afternoon. Okay, in a minute we'll have the slides. We can see some pictures from the Ukraine. What I wanted to talk about, what I was asked to speak about, is the situation of Holocaust survivors in the Ukraine, what the Claims Conference is doing. So first I want to show a map of the Ukraine. And you can see each of the communities that are have a box around them are places where we have a local welfare center, together with the Joint Distribution Committee. The Claims Conference is funding local welfare centers, which are providing a range of services, in our case funded for Holocaust survivors, which include home care, food, medicine, socialization programs, but also other services for Jewish elderly, and intergenerational programs as well. Louder. Wow. People don't usually say that, louder. Happy to be louder. Okay. What's really important for us is that our services in the Ukraine were only possible because of the work that we're doing in literally 43 countries around the world. The infrastructure, the network that exists to take care of Holocaust survivors around the world exists in the Ukraine also. And if we did not have that infrastructure in Ukraine, in this case, together with the Joint Distribution Committee, then providing the services under extreme conditions would not be possible. So first, let me take a minute to just talk about our global program. For 2023, for next year, in this area, the Claims Conference will distribute 775 million euros, most of which comes from the German government. Of that, 97% is for welfare for Holocaust survivors. That means home care, food, medicine, transportation, and 3%, which will be spent on Shoah, Holocaust, education, research, documentation, archives, etc. People ask the Claims Conference all the time, how is it possible that the budgets are so large? Why do you need so much money? Why is it increasing? So in this slide, you will see that the amount of funding for home care has been increasing each year. And the simple answer is, although Holocaust survivors are dying, everyone understands that, those who remain alive are older and sicker and poorer, and they need more help. And it will probably be another 2 or 3 years before that need plateaus and then unfortunately sharply declines. And in these last years, providing these essential services is the most important thing for the Claims Conference. If you look at the services, this breaks down how that money is spent. 79% is spent on home care, 6.7% on food, 1% on emergency assistance, 2% on medical programs, and 5% on case management and legal services, which means that the staff to meet with the survivor and understand what they need. Overwhelmingly, the money is going to home care, a person that comes in and changes the diaper of a person who can't get out of bed, a Holocaust survivor, that makes food for someone who can't carry heavy packages, can't cook for themselves, an Alzheimer's patient who forgets that they've turned on the stove but lives alone and is a Holocaust survivor. 80% of the money is spent on that. Okay, I'll move a little bit along because of the time. Altogether, with that money, we are serving 118,000 Holocaust survivors. And I think it was Secretary Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken from the US, who said there are 110,000 Holocaust survivors who are poor today. So if last year we served 118,000, it makes sense. We are serving the poorest, most vulnerable of Holocaust survivors in 43 countries, wherever they are. That's 78,000 who received home care. It's 46 million hours of home care. The average age of a Holocaust survivor was 87. Of these 118,000 survivors, we had 1,107 who are 100 years old or more. And we received 10,000 new clients. It means for the first time last year, there were 10,000 Holocaust survivors who needed home care. For the first time. That's a person who falls and breaks their hip, and yesterday didn't need home care, but today does. Now, imagine that infrastructure around the world, 43 countries. Now let's come back to the Ukraine. First of all, before the war, meaning 9 months ago, there were approximately 10,000 Holocaust survivors, Jewish Holocaust survivors living in the Ukraine. About 25% live in Kiev. We did have programs in both Donetsk and Lugansk where since 2014 it's really under Russian control or fighting. There are 3 cities that have larger programs, Kharkiv, Dnipro, and Odessa. And then there are a couple of cities that have smaller numbers of Holocaust survivors. And when I talk about these cities, it could be in the city and it could also be in the small villages surrounding the cities. And this gives you the number in each one of the locations of the number of Holocaust survivors who are being served. And let me be clear, we have a database, we have a list with each survivor's name, where they live, what their medical condition is, verified their persecution during the Holocaust, and that is true for 118,000 around the world, but it's certainly true for the 10,000 in the Ukraine that we need to make sure are surviving this war as best they can. I would just want to point out, I put a blue box around it, I just want to point out Sumy, a city in Ukraine, because I'm going to come back to that, and Nikolaev. Before the war, because as troops were amassing on the border, people said, this may happen. Before the war, we said, okay, we have thousands of survivors who are receiving home care. How are we going to make sure that they continue to receive home care when the communication lines are down? There's going to be no telephone, there's probably going to be no internet, maybe there won't be electricity. How are we going to ensure that a person who can't get out of bed, who's wearing a diaper, who can't cook for themselves, that that person not be abandoned? And so we ensured that we had volunteers who would go in case the paid workers couldn't go, that we had communication networks in each one of the places, either literally walkie-talkies, or people saying, I will meet you at 3 o'clock on this corner, and have the supervisor for their 10 social workers. Systems in place knowing the war was coming. Paid home care workers, volunteers, as I said, making sure there were plenty of supplies, stockpiling adult diapers, stockpiling medicines, stockpiling food, mattresses, go bags, the communications that I spoke about, and then, of course, February 24th, when the war started. A week after the war, it became clear that there were places that didn't have food, that didn't have water. And so even though we had not intended this, we said, okay, what can we do to help? So with our team based in Berlin, we hired trucks, 18-wheel trucks, and we went to stores and we started to buy food. And we loaded up the trucks with pallets of food. Now, keep in mind, who are our staff in Berlin? They're lawyers, they're researchers, they're not logistics people, and we've never done this before, but whatever needed to get done to make sure that there was going to be food for these 10,000 Holocaust survivors, we did. So here's a picture of some of our team. This is our representative in Germany, Rudy Malo. This is a picture of the wheat being loaded up on pallets. This is a truck, as you can see. Now, this was on March 6th. Keep in mind, the war started February 24th. This was on March 6th, our trucks in Berlin. This is the trucks being loaded and arriving at a warehouse in Lvov. So we took them from Berlin, drove them across Poland, and brought them into Lvov, where it was emptied into, unloaded into these warehouses for eventual distribution to Holocaust survivors throughout Ukraine. There's a short video.
That's the second truck.
I'll move it along. We started with loading the trucks in Berlin, and 3 days later, after loading up the trucks, driving them across Poland, bringing them to Lvov, unloading them in the warehouse, breaking them down into individual pallets, driving them to all of those different locations throughout the Ukraine, this is a picture of a Holocaust survivor in Sumy who receives the food package. Here's another Holocaust survivor. In the black bag is the food that you saw being loaded up. And the success of that delivery encouraged more success, more deliveries. This is water that was loaded up in Bratislava, in Slovakia. And this is it being unloaded in Nikolaev. This is beans and rice that we got in Budapest that we brought in. Wherever we could source significant quantities in very short times, load it up, bring it across the border to Uzhhorod, to Chernovice, to Lvov, wherever we could, even in places where we didn't have warehouses, we had to go rent warehouses within the Ukraine. This is another picture of a Holocaust survivor with the contents of the food package on his table. In addition to all of this, there were definitely people. We set up a call center in Tel Aviv, and we offered every single person the ability to evacuate if they wanted to. If they didn't, what did they need and what could we bring them? But we offered every single one of the 10,000 Holocaust survivors the ability to evacuate, and several hundred did. Most survivors said the Germans pushed me out when I was a kid, the Russians are not going to do it now. And it's what we refer to as the bookends of suffering. Suffering so much as a child under the Nazis in the Shoah, and now this unimaginable suffering. I say it's unimaginable. It's unimaginable to me going through this once. These are people who lived it twice. We did these medical evacuations for the people who were the most disabled. We brought in ambulances. We created an interministerial task force with the government of Germany. So it was the Chancellery, the Foreign Affairs Ministry, the Interior Ministry. It worked out to be 7 different ministries, several different NGOs, obviously the Joint Distribution Committee, something called Zaka, United Hatzalah, Chabad. Really was an amazing coalition of different organizations and governments. The German Red Cross, which provided some of the ambulances, obviously the German Jewish community, and the ZVS, the social welfare agency in Germany. And the idea was not only rescuing them and bringing them out of Ukraine, bringing them to Germany, and think about how unbelievable it is. Holocaust survivors who are finding refuge in Germany, but guaranteeing that they would have a culturally appropriate and medically appropriate place to remain in Germany for the rest of their lives if it's needed. These are some pictures of the medical evacuations. These are Holocaust survivors being loaded into ambulances from, let's say, Kiev, driven across Ukraine, driven across Poland, being brought into 10 different communities that helped absorb them in Germany, in Berlin, in Dusseldorf, and Frankfurt, etc. This is a picture of some of the survivors at an old age home. And recently we had a gathering of some of the board members and some of the people connected with the claims conference with some of the survivors. Here you see me with one of the very grateful survivors in Berlin. This is a picture, as I said, of Dr. Malo, our representative in Germany, Ambassador Eisenstadt, Colette Avital, Andrew Baker. Ultimately, I want to finish on this point. Helping the 10,000 Holocaust survivors in the Ukraine is dramatic. They're in unimaginable circumstances yet again. But every day, there are 110,000 Holocaust survivors in 43 different countries who need our help. We're doing what we can by negotiating with Germany, with other countries, and providing home care and medicine and relief. But we need more. We need the partnership of the people in this room, the countries in this room. So property restitution, of course, heirless property restitution can be used to support the efforts, for sure. But there are other things that can be done. In the United States, it was when Biden was the vice president, he created within what's called the Department of Health and Human Services a person who was designated specifically to help coordinate activities for Holocaust survivors. There are creative programs that we can do in various countries. So if there's any country here that wants to join us with helping the survivors living currently in your own country, come to us, talk to us. We want to partner with everyone in these last few remaining years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. And now we turn to Maya Samokovlija for the WJC for a perspective on what their activities have been. Maya, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I know I have a pretty hard last name to pronounce. It's Maya Samokovlija. I'm the Executive Director of Community Relations in World Jewish Congress. For all those of you that don't know, World Jewish Congress has its affiliates in more than 100 countries around the world. And the affiliates we have are usually the representing bodies of the Jewish communities and organizations in different countries. So they are the ones that your governments are talking to usually. When the crisis started on 24th of February, and us, of course, being affiliated to the 4th biggest community in Europe and 11th biggest Jewish community in the world, Ukraine, the logical decision for our leadership, headed by President Ronald Lauder, was to immediately help. The work of World Jewish Congress usually is not humanitarian relief, but in this matter and at this point in history, it was out of question that we're not getting involved. Not so long ago, 30 years ago, a bit less, similar situation happened also in the heart of Europe in former Yugoslavia. Sarajevo, the capital city of Bosnia and Herzegovina, was under siege for 4 years, which is the longest siege of the capital city in Europe in modern times, in world in modern times, I'm sorry. The people of Sarajevo wrote a graffiti on the synagogue in the capital city, Sarajevo, which read, "The Jews are feeding Sarajevo." The only organizations, the only nation in the multicultural Bosnia and Herzegovina that had immediate help was the Jewish community. And now mentioned organizations that are still helping and are always helping since the Second World War and prior to it. The people of Sarajevo were lucky on the convoys of humanitarian aid and help that came to the Jewish community of Sarajevo by using this food and medical supplies and medicine. The same happened now. In Ukraine, not in the same scale, not by the same actors. It's much bigger. The Jewish community of Ukraine numbers somewhere between 5,600 up to 120,000 Jews in a country that territorially was bigger than ex-Yugoslavia or Bosnia that I just mentioned. So, as we just now heard the beautiful and amazing work that Claims Conference is doing with the Holocaust survivors, I will then concentrate a bit more in these 2 minutes about WJC's decision to help and bring as much aid and financial help and support to our affiliates in Ukraine, which we have two. We are affiliated to the Jewish Confederation of Ukraine and WJRO of Ukraine. I don't know if you heard of them, but these are the two biggest affiliates and communities, organizations that are covering the communities inside of Ukraine. WJRO of Ukraine represents 267 Jewish organizations in Ukraine from 94 different cities. We saw the map of Ukraine. It's not a small country. 53 religious communities, 56 city communities, 13 social structures, 17 Jewish schools, 79 Jewish organizations of culture, and now what's important for this conference is 12 organizations of the ghetto prisoners and concentration camp survivors are under the affiliation of the WJRO, that's our affiliate. So the first thing was, of course, to help Holocaust survivors and those in the most need, meaning older people, maybe those that are not Holocaust survivors but are not able to go out of their homes, their villages, their buildings. What we did with the WJRO of Ukraine is that we immediately tried and looked for ways to help bring humanitarian aid, because we had the same dilemma like all our friends from different Jewish organizations, how to ship big amounts of food and aid inside of Ukraine. We were lucky because our scales were not as big, so we did have a straight corridor from different cities in Europe to Kiev, and from Kiev's warehouses we were able to distribute to other 54 cities in Ukraine where our affiliate has communities. We sent more than 10 tons of food, medical supplies, medicine, IFAC kits, heating systems, and so on. One of the things that was most amazing, and I will finish with this even though I wanted to talk about more things, but sadly we don't have time. One of the things that is important for us as World Jewish Congress and that touched me the most in all of this process is that in April, when the Jews around the world celebrate Pesach, I've asked Mr. Zissels, who is the president of WJRO, what can we send more? We just sent a truck of 7 tons of food. What can we send? And he said, can you please send us matzah bread? Which was totally unexpected from my side. And I said, of course, we'll find it. And we did. We managed to ship 8 tons of matzah to Ukraine so that each Jewish person that they were able to reach to had matzah bread on their table. The other thing, and I will finish up with this, is that we had the opportunity to work with our affiliates in bordering countries of Ukraine and to help everybody from the Jewish communities inside of Ukraine find shelter in their permanent places of residence in bordering countries before leaving mostly to Israel and then to their families around the world. And we had the opportunity to see one beautiful thing that didn't happen during the World War II, which was mostly the topic now. And that's that on the railway stations, on the bus stations, and the shelters, there were people from all possible backgrounds that I could imagine willing to help with as much as they had. And I think that that's a bit brighter light in this pretty dark future in front of us, that actually people show the face that they're here with open arms, wanting to help the people of Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maya. I want to thank our panelists. It's been a very brief session, but I think it's very important to get a practical perspective on what we're talking about right now. This conference was held 13 years after the original Terezín conference. In Jewish tradition, 13 is the year of a bar mitzvah, of a boy assuming responsibility. Girls do it at the age of 12. I think that's really part of the goal of this conference is to take, and our panelists have demonstrated it, what happens when you assume responsibility, when you move forward in a practical way on these issues. The example from our panelists show us how to do that, but now it is up to the governments involved that are here to take up the challenge and to do so as well. Thank you all.